prolonged conflict and escalating violence, leading to a record 6.9 million people being displaced. In short, can you break down what is going on? How do we get here? How does the scale of this humanitarian crisis compare to other global crises?
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I did look at this question ahead of time, and it is kind of it's complicated. I'm gonna try to simplify it as much as possible. I know we have a little bit of time. Often we don't go back far enough when we have to give historical context. We know historical context is important, but a lot of times when we're coming from a Western purview, then we don't go back far enough, and in a ways that sometimes escapes the West, the analysis that we need, the culpability of the West is missing from it. So right now, the first thing we have to understand that with all of Africa, Africa is the richest continent on the face of the earth in terms one of, I guess, maybe some people could say some places in South America, but it's very rich in mineral resources. And the Congo, which is considered the heart of Africa, actually seemed to be the richest area within the continent of Africa. And that what plagues Africa and Congo as a microcosm of that, as a concentration of that, is the richest of the resources and the coveting and the desire to control those resources. I think it's important for us to first understand that the Congo as a country and the colonial borders, that a lot of people may be familiar with the Berlin Conference in 1880s, where the European colonial powers came down and sat together in Berlin and carved up Africa. So we know that the borders of Africa are colonized or are made from colonialism. The Congo is no different, and the Congo was carved up and given to the personal property of King Leopold II. It was his personal property, and he ruled it as a personal property. That whole reason, I mean, if you look at a map, the Congo's pretty big, and if you can imagine one person owning that, and with the type of obscene and rule and power hungry rule that can come with that, they used it a lot to extract rubber. And so we say that resources are very important. If we don't understand the resource question and the land question, everything else will only confuse us. And this leads all the way to today. And then as King Leopold was so brutal, it became the Belgian government just kind of took over and said, and not that they were less brutal, but it was more of an embarrass. It was like how it was being depicted in his brutality and extravagance was. And so they took over rule of the Congo from 1908 all the way until the 60s, 1960, when the rise of the independence movements and decolonization movements. So we're talking about 6 decades of brutal Belgian colonialism, first under King Leopold and then under Belgium, and that in the emergence of the independence movements, you have the election of as prime minister Patrice Lumumba. There was already a president, a figurehead president, Joseph Kasavubu, and that now with the actually getting official independence. And what I'm trying to describe here is an evolution and a descendancy, not a descendance in terms of people, but a descendancy in terms of systems. The system of colonialism has its descendant, its offspring is what we know as neocolonialism. If we don't understand that with that neocolonialism being, and this is what plagues Africa and a lot of the formerly colonized world, and particularly the Congo, is that it has all the outward trappings of independence, but still your politics and your economy is controlled by the outside, the former colonizers, and this is what's happening today. And so we don't often we're looking to the neo-colonizers today for redress. In when the independence movements emerged, particularly in the Congo, and then a lot of people know Patrice Lumumba was elected, and that he had a vision that was for a really self-determination and even a Pan-African vision for the Congo and the control of the resources. There was a lot of I have to make this part short because it's complex, but I'm just going to gloss over it, and people should really look into. And there's a good resource. The book by Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Africa, he wrote the book Challenge of the Congo, a case study I can't remember the subtitle, case study and the something about an independent African state or something like that, and that but Challenge of the Congo by Kwame Nkrumah. If you know that, you'll find it. They had to undermine, and we're talking about Belgium and the CIA. The United States was involved in this. They wanted the rich resources of the East, and where we see most of the conflict now is in the east of the Congo, with what now we're seeing is the M23 movement, the movement for the M23 movement, or M23 they call it. And that these, okay, I'm sorry. Let me go back. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Well,
That
I would like to introduce, actually, we have Algine Sajiri with us, CEO of Cactus Global Strategies and host of the Minority Leaders podcast. So I'm going to turn this conversation over to Algine as well. We can pick up where you just left off as we're diving in. But I think Algine we're really excited to have you, grateful you're here, and happy to have you lead this discussion.
Thank you. Apparently, I was signed in as a guest and not a moderator, but happy to be here.
Girl likes to do what she does.
No problem. I was just confused when you started moderating. But thank you, and I'm happy to be here. I am a cisgender woman, African born, brown skin, and just really happy to be here. I've been listening to this discussion. Thank you, Netfa, for the great intro. I am curious now that we are going to kick off the discussion about what's going on today. The elections are coming up in the DRC in just a few days, on December 20th, and we now see peacekeepers from the region, the East Africa Committee, leaving the country. How does that impact the conflict that's going on right now? And what have we seen since the announcement of the withdrawal of peacekeepers?
So so I think that and then I'm going to give you basically my opinion. I think it's an informed opinion, but it's not an opinion nonetheless. One of the reasons that the peacekeepers are leaving from the East African community is that they've been ineffective in settling the violence there, and that also in trying to include the very countries, Uganda and Rwanda, who are serving as proxies that destabilize the Congo. They have military personnel who are also part of these groups, like M23. And so they've been, and that the government of Congo has seen that they have been ineffective, and that hopefully the coming in will be a mission from the SADC countries, the Southern African Development Community, which was effective before, years ago, in trying to stabilize the border, that eastern border in the Congo between the rest, and also have even arresting the activities of the M23 before, which actually, because it had been done, but then they reemerged as soon as those forces pulled back. And so I think, what we really need to see, and what we need to see is, one, the acknowledgement that of the role of Uganda and Rwanda in the destabilization and these forces, and funding, training, and supporting these forces. No matter what they claim, it's already been established. Even the UN studies have established that they are playing this role, and that the United States government, in supporting them, no matter what they say, they are supporting military aid, training through AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, and supporting these and turning a blind eye to their role in the Congo, while they might say that they're helping them with other things in terms of, like, Mozambique, trying to stop the jihadists in Mozambique. And I don't want to get too far away from the Congo, but it's really hard to only focus on one country when everything is so interconnected, and that those who are really the puppeteers and puppet masters are really doing something that's very continentally geostrategic. And so that was how I referred to the first thing. And a lot of because you mentioned the elections, and that's true. Elections are coming up. And what we're seeing is a lot of the people who are running, and we see this running. I don't want to, I can't really the leadership of the Congo has not been, not even just the leadership of the Congo, even those who are trying to involve themselves in calling themselves destabilize, like the EAS and EAC, are not. There's no consultation of the masses of the people of the Congo. Now, of course, that's difficult to do when there's so much turmoil. It's hard to convene people and to get an analysis also that's appropriate, it's implementable. But that has to be done. And I think, and so we're talking about really trying to revamp a democratic process too, something that is more like a participatory democracy. Right now, we in all of Africa, and Congo's no different, we're seeing what we refer to as comprador class leadership, where they really are serving the interests of the multinational corporations and the foreign powers that need unfettered access to the uranium and the cobalt and the coltan in Africa. And no matter what else they might say, we know that in Congo that they're not manufacturing cell phones or iPads or tablets, but that's where the minerals are coming from. The conflict in that region, because they found a lot of big deposits, that's where they're getting the deposits from, are sort of bands of people, the groups, the militarized groups or violent groups, are really groups. This evolution of this, unless we believe the African people are inferior, this evolution of this is the outgrowth of 138 years of colonialism and the neocolonialism, people trying to figure out how to survive. Either you become part of one of these violent groups and you strong arm your way around and you kill people, or you become the victims of the violent groups. It's really not, I'm not trying to excuse what people do, but this is where the condition comes from, and that they control.
I want to pick up on that point. I'm sorry to interrupt you, because I think you made a really important point about the conflict being fueled by this exploitation of natural resources. I recommend, and you mentioned King Leopold in Belgium, there is an excellent book on this topic. I actually read it while I was in college, and it's still poignant today. It's called King Leopold's Ghost. It is incredible. It reads like a novel, but it's a historical account of what happened in that country, and it really explains the context of what's going on today. And so you have all of these groups now, M23, all of these groups here in the Congo, really fighting for these resources. How much is the exploitation of natural resources such as coltan, gold, diamonds fueled the conflict? I think it's really the underpinning of the conflict, but there's certainly much more to that. And then how can the international community, including the East Africa community, address the issues of resource-driven conflicts in the region? Because like you said, it's not just Congo, it is a regional problem, but Congo seems to be the hot button, the linchpin of it all.
Well, the Congo is so rich in resources. There's it's said that in there you have more or just as many resources as the periodic chart has on the thing, and a lot of the world and this the new electronic age in terms of all these tablets gets 64% of the coltan. 64% of the coltan that's used in these things comes from the Congo. So it's very pivotal. If we think about the fact that a people's given the ability to make some binding decisions on how they would order their society, and also recover like reparations in terms of like repair from the violence that happens and all of that. If there was, because when I mentioned the participatory democracy, we have to realize that once a people that comes together and decides, okay, well, we want to also control our resources too. We want to figure out, instead of this portion of land being used for mining, we need to use it for cultivate some crops or something like that. Even if we do use it for the mining, we have to control the market price and all that. We might even want to start manufacturing some of these goods to create some finished goods, so we're not just the raw materials for it. Once you have that situation, you're having a people that's going to reject the international order, the neoliberal imperialist order that says everything's valued on its worth to capitalism and capitalism and concentration of wealth. So that I'm saying that to say that the NATO countries, the Western countries led by the United States, cannot afford for there to be a stable Congo. So if we don't accept that, if we don't understand that, everything else that happens on the ground will be bewildered by it. The East African community has to recognize and accept that if you're going to do something, you got to get some input from the masses of the people. You also, as a conflict of interest, have to exclude countries like Rwanda in your, you just have to. I mean, they just have to, unless they own up to something, or if not exclude them, at least not the leadership, the government forces. You have to actually have people on the ground who have also understand and share the interest of a stable Rwanda and stable borders and even an African unity, because the government forces, and we could see it even with like things that like Paul Kagame, the leader, the president of Rwanda, has said, actually they call for things that really would divide up Africa. They'll break up the Congo. They would cover some of that territory. They're claiming this territory used to belong to Rwanda before the Berlin Conference, and that may be true, but that's not really anything that's going to stop them taking some territory or whatever. It's not going to solve the problem that Africa has. We really need a united Africa that's ordered under redistribution of land and wealth for the benefit of the masses of people, and not something that's really what do you call it? What's the word? I'm deferring to because you said that the international community, and we use that term a lot of times by default. We also mean those that are most powerful, like those in the United Nations and the World Trade Organization and the World Bank. And when we say United Nations, we're only talking about the Security Council of the United Nations, because the rest doesn't really have any binding say. And the Security Council of the United Nations, the configuration of these institutions are what we term really should amount to imperialism.
Well, let me pull on that thread. Let me pull on that thread, because the UN has been involved. As you know, the organization has just announced that the situation with displaced people within the Congo is dire, and we see even more fighting now. What has been the UN's role in shaping and implementing the international policies concerning the conflict in the DRC, and have any of these UN resolutions been effective? How have they influenced the situation on the ground? What's your view? I mean, you just called it an imperialistic organization, and I understand that point of view, but how has it been effective or ineffective at influencing the conflict?
Well, I do want to clarify what I said, because the United Nations is a little bit more complicated than for me to dismiss it as imperial. I don't know if that, I didn't exactly use that words, but I can see how what I said implies that. Yeah. But there's a Security Council of United Nations, and there are permanent members, and then there are rotating people who get a seat on the Security Council, and the rest is the General Assembly that really can't even leverage any binding resolutions. They've called for the dismissal of U.S. blockade of Cuba for over and over again, and they can't, and no one's to hold account. But the Security Council is comprised of a lot of the form, and they have veto power over the other, of other resolutions. So that's the United States, Britain, France, China. I mean, China's on there, and Russia, and I'm trying. And then there's the rotating members. I'm forgetting some other members, and that. These are basically the countries that dominate the Security Council and have permanent seats that have an interest in sustaining the global order. So, and then you mentioned that the UN mission that's in the Congo really hasn't had. I mean, it's another one that's also being sent out, along with and so they're also sending them out. And I'm not claiming that the decisions from the Congolese government to send them away, they are based on their ineffectiveness, but I'm not claiming that this Felix Tshisekedi or have, I know I messed up his name.
Take a shame. Yeah.
Are like, I would say, leaders who are for a radical transformation of the country for the benefit of the people. No. But at least this decision to eject or send out to end the mission of these formations is based on the fact that they have been ineffective, and that now the politicians, even those who are running, they're running on these promises, are run on the fact that they're going to do something about this. We can't really do anything about these things, no matter what the relationship is. I think it really needs, one, a united Africa. We need to have an African Union that really is for a true uniting of Africa, and has to have an anti neocolonialism disposition. Figure out how do we, not make ourselves subject to the economic structural adjustment programs of the IMF and the world. How do we, gain control of our resources? How do we create, if we're going to have this extractive industry, because there's a lot of extractive stuff there that misuses, I would say, the land in a lot of ways, and also the planet. It's not good for the planet. But how do we wean ourselves off of that? We have a global economy in a world that's kind of dependent on a lot of these things. But for the leadership to not accept this as a condition that they have to sustain, but rather condition that we must wean ourselves away from, then we have to have different leadership. And then the people have to really be able to see that there has to be a revolutionary vision, like the vision for Africa that emerged in the original formation of the Organization of African States, the regional formation, the regional entities like the East African Community and whatnot we have to have anti-capitalist leaders up in there that are for a united Africa, and something that uses and redistributes things for the benefits of the people, farmland and free education and free healthcare, not something, because these other institutions make it. There's the structural adjustment programs that I referred to. These are the strings that these neo-colonizers put on countries, which include things like lifting your tariffs and giving unfettered access to foreign investors and whatnot, and being able to take and buy land, not spending money on healthcare and education and those things to develop the population. And they make them we have to buy weapons. They stir up conflicts, because there's now, not only does it help with the destabilization and the hyper extraction of these minerals, but it also is an industrial complex in itself.
It's really, what's really a shame is that even though it is an industrial complex, and these minerals are fueling the world, fueling our cell phones, fueling our laptops that we're on right now, right? The people of the Congo continue to suffer. And when you touched on something, I want to just pull on that thread, because the fact that none of the resources are really processed in the country, it seems to me to be a big part of the problem. There are warring groups and factions, including M23, but we're talking about decades of different warring groups that have been fighting out for these resources over the years. And they're being extracted out of the ground and exported out, manufactured somewhere else, creating jobs elsewhere, and not creating jobs for the Congolese people. I think that's a really important point in this conflict, is that the resources are being exported and taken out of the ground. To what extent do you blame or do you estimate that corruption in the entire process between the various militia groups and the government, maybe even some aspects of the private sector or local suppliers to the private sector, are engaged in that? And to what extent is corruption playing in fueling the conflict and fueling this terrible humanitarian situation?
Without corruption, corruption is integral to the process. Without corruption, they would be very difficult for them to, because there are like laws and things put on the illicit, accumulation of illicit trade of diamonds, of different things, different minerals. But then people get around them based on the corruption at the highest levels, but also corruption even on the ground. And so without this, and then to me, I would even define corruption almost maybe a little bit more broadly than not just people breaking the law, but also even but just not looking at the interests of the people in general, and just doing things so that they're concentrating wealth and amassing profits off of the minerals and whatnot, and not putting it back into the development of the country.
And when you think about that, and the fact that there is this.
I'm sorry. I wanted to when I said broader than law, I just want to clarify what I mean is like what some people call lawfare. So using law, making things within the realm of legality, but at the same time, the morality and ethics of it are corrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, given that situation, how credible then is the government with its decisions to keep out peacekeepers, MONUSCO and others, the EAC force, right before the election? We know Tshisekedi is going for a second term, his second 5-year term. And there are 20 opponents who are, vying for that space as well, for that leadership role. And we see an increase in the conflict right around the time of the elections. I mean, some of the stories that have been coming out lately are absolutely terrible, with mobs actually attacking soldiers and things like that. So to what extent do you see the dismissal of the forces, right or wrong, in policy wise, basically based on their effectiveness, as really just an action that furthers the corruption, that furthers the potential for rigged elections? Do you see any connection there?
No, I mean, because the rigged elections or not, these forces have never done anything to prevent rigged elections or even the violence. Now, it kind of, if I'm understanding the fullness of your question, it also has to do with how genuine is. I always mess up this brother's name. Desiccating. In terms of and it's not just him, but yeah, I can only give you my opinion. I believe that it may be an experiment, and we know in the past that also the Southern African Development Community has had much more success, and that there is maybe an experiment to figure and knowing the effectiveness of these others have just been no effectiveness. That just trying something, whether we know in general there's no genuineness, because for me, you gotta, not just for me, but for a lot, you have to go on a radical redistribution of wealth and implement, universal healthcare and all that. You have to do revolutionary stuff, and he ain't no revolutionary. So that's clear. But I think what we don't want to confuse and keep the essence and the essence of the problem based on the local confinement of it, and missing the international economy, and the puppeteers, the people who meet with them, and then do a wink and a nod when there's certain things that happen with Kagame or any of the these people, even just a Katie. He's meeting with the East African community, trying to figure out what to do. Now, people might want to quell the violence, particularly, and you might want to only do it just so you can win an election. You want to say you did something, but for the people being able to at least have some semblance of, I don't even say normalcy, but just not having to worry about the violence. But that's not really going to be enough. We really there has to be a liberation, an African liberation, where the people are able to organize themselves in a way to exercise power over their land, over the resources, power over the institutions that govern their lives, like even the army or the education or the healthcare, those kind of things, all of that. Where and it can be done because we know countries do it, but it can't. But we have, which means though we have to look at the class configuration, the class aspect. I used the word compradors before, and I keep using it, and I want to make sure I don't want to take it for granted that people know what I'm talking about, know what it means. It's basically people who are entrusted to represent you and govern the people, but they're actually working for the outside. And so when we say neocolonialism, the comprador class, there's a class of people, they benefit, they live well in the continent. People living well despite the suffering of the masses of the people. So how do we figure out, and this is not just for the Congo, but it's for all of Africa, in fact, all of what we would consider the global South, a configuration, a system where the people are able to come together, make decisions, binding decisions. This is a governance situation. In other words, they're not just voting for representatives for office, but they're voting for reforms and referendums and things in policy. They're actually voting for the policy that's binding, that whoever's holding office roles in these offices, they have to implement these decisions that the people have made. They're not just deciding for the people, because that's where the corruption also can come, because the people are not really empowered to exercise self-determination.
Well, that is why I even raised corruption. You mentioned compradors, and again, the people are the ones suffering. There are immediate and long-term humanitarian consequences of this conflict. What are you seeing as those consequences, and how can the international community, the EAC, the AU, the UN, how can they help to mitigate those consequences? What is your recommendation for the way forward?
So the consequences are many. Actually, we didn't even get into the potential that the Congo has for powering the continent of Africa in terms of power, electricity, and that also for environmental helping against the emissions, CO2 emissions, and people refer to the Congo, the Amazon, or the rainforest in the Congo as being a second lung of the world, based on, and I think so. There's a lot of potential that the Congo has.
Number one sequester of carbon emissions in the world, more than the Amazon.
Than the Amazon. And so there's a lot of potential for actually reversing a lot of the things, the destruction that's caused by imperialism and neoliberalism. In fact, it's another reason why, like in a united Africa that's actually cooperating and have is not in the interest of imperialism. And Congo could facilitate that in a lot of ways because of what it has mineral resources, but also where it is situated geographically. But get to your so there's a lot of things that are happening as a result of the destabilization of the Congo that cause bad things outside of what happens to the people of the Congo and what happens to the borders, and that stabilizing the Congo and having that will be revolutionize a lot of things on the continent and globally. Now, for me, in terms of you mentioned some of these institutions, and I think that we really have to think beyond them. We have to revisit the anti-imperialist struggle that founded the Organization of African Unity. Now you see the AU, which is really has really fallen short, and the legacy that it comes out of it's rejected the legacy. So I'm just going to say a few points that I think we have to go back to a Pan-Africanism for the solution for the Congo, one united Africa under scientific socialism. This means the expulsion of all foreign forces on the continent, except for in terms of the forces, not just people being there. We're not talking about that, but we're talking about the military forces and also institutions like the World Bank or whatever, and them coming dictating things where they have have people coming, establishing
Well, the leaders
participatory,
have to not sign those agreements
sign
with
those agreements.
World Bank and
What,
one.
or if they, because I mean, this is more complicated than it sounds to just not sign them, but they do have to reject, anything, so you can, anyways, this, establishing participatory democratic processes. So we have to actually support people on the ground who are doing this, because there are activists in the Congo, and there are organizations, civil society, as we will, that are working for these. And we want to make sure, though, that the civil society, they also, because the Western countries, the US, EU, NATO countries, led by the US, I put the US, but the NATO and EU countries, are have ways of co-opting the civil society and giving them money and all that kind of stuff and making them. But we want to be careful not to be in that. We have to have this redistribution of land done in a way to facilitate radical agrarian reforms that will feed the masses. We have to have energy projects that advance Congo's current hydroelectric potentials, and we just talked about the potential of that, and universal education, universal healthcare. These have to be any institutions that are not making this the foundation of whatever their intervention or whatever their intentions are cannot be, legitimate, cannot be working. We cannot see them as working in the best interest of the Congo. And cultural programs that uplift the Africans and the Congolese, that help re-envision and reimagine a new Congo, and how to exercise self-determination in the Congo. These and these are not just things for the Congo, they're for all over, but we really desperately need them in the Congo. And when we say cultural institutions and programs, because there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of people who are just like, all they know is like violence, and not just violence perpetrated against them, but some people are like the perpetrators of the violence,
Yeah.
And it's just like our communities in the US or any industrialized country. We have violence, and then the answer from the powers that be is always police. Get more police, not looking at the conditions, the underlying conditions of colonization or domestic colonization that cause these things, but always just impunitive. And the same thing with Africa, sending the troops, get it, and it got to be, and now the West has become sophisticated now, and that they're not going to directly invade Africa in most cases, but we saw what they did in Libya. But in a lot of cases, they won't just directly invade. They'll get the Comprador African leadership to do it, and then they pay, they have soldiers and they train them and all that. So, but anyway, what I'm saying is that we have to re-educate our people, so that we can see through this and actually work for our own interests, and not be duped by the type of this Western worldview is really a white supremacist international worldview that we have to end.
I think, and I agree with you on that. I think, though, we also have to hold the African leaders accountable.
We have to depose them. They have to be deposed. There's no accountability there. They're worthless too. I'm sorry. We have to put people in power. That's why I said the participatory democratic processes. They're going to elect, they're going to identify people who emerge from them, who are genuine, who work for the people, and they're going to put those. That's who we need to have in. These compradors are already, they're just.
How does that happen now? Because honestly, I want to ask that question, because I know there's a lot that we're throwing out into anybody who is not a Congo expert. It could probably be a lot of information to take in, but I'm looking at something that the organizers put together that's, saying there might be parallels between Wakanda, the fictional Wakanda, Black Panther movie Wakanda, and the DRC. Certainly in the resources. I mean, the DRC has an abundance of natural resources that literally fuel every aspect of our lives, from energy to our phones. Yeah, the leadership, is what is the difference between the Congo and Wakanda.
How do
we empower those people in civil society there are wonderful Congolese activists doing great work. They've been doing it for 30 years through this conflict, for 30 years. So how do we get there? How, who deposes these bad leaders? How do we get there? where the people actually have the power to dictate how their resources are used to actually benefit from that resource-rich country. How do we end that legacy of colonial exploitation? How do we do that?
And
What are
and
your
I'm
recommendations?
and I'm you're asking the question kind of like as people who are not Congolese and in the Congo ourselves, basically what is our role in this?
Yeah.
And so, and it's a good question. It's an excellent, we have to answer the question. I think it starts with one, since so we have to know that we can't do it, that we can support it, because when we said we just recognize that there are people on the ground, we got to identify those forces and give them all the support we can. I was going to put Friends of the Congo as an organization in did I put that? I'm
I love
sorry,
that
I'll put it
organization.
in the chat. That's one organization, but they
Yes,
also, oops, I'm trying to put it in the chat. My mouse is acting crazy.
I can do that.
Okay, friendsofthecongo.org is
Mhm.
the website, and they are also a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, but there's also other organizations. But anyway, but what Friends of the Congo can do is connect. They have connections on the ground, and also a vision of how to support participatory and like different projects that are calling for that. That's one thing. The other thing that we have to do is that we have to, especially those of us who reside in the imperialist countries, we got to oppose the policies and expose the role. We have to expose the role of the United States supporting Rwanda and Uganda, and by way, or supporting M23 by way of Rwanda and Uganda. Is really, let's keep it plain. M23 is a proxy for the United States. If when it comes down to it, if in fact the Rwanda and Uganda are mostly Rwanda using M23, and Uganda is sometimes just directly invading, now using the pretext of trying to keep in the Islamics of the Allied Democratic, ADS is, I can't remember the organ, but they forces that they're trying to say, oh, we have to save Congo from the ISIS folks and all that. It's just whatever. We have to call out these geopolitical maneuvers that are happening, and where they're getting this funding from and their support from, not just funding but support. We have to call it out. And we have to create movements like, on the ground. We are the policymakers in the countries that we reside in. Here, we're in the United States. I don't know if we might have people online that are in other countries too. But, we have to call out the inaction or the blind eye and the naked support that our policymakers, even like Congressional Black Caucus, all of them, they'll say, oh, we need AFRICOM and whatnot. The militarizing of the Africa. Really? We need, we have to be able to do wage political education, mass political education programs for our people to make us understand, help us understand the connections and with at the African continent and us, our connections here, and how the interests that are being served the interests served for the powers that be here are not our same interests, even though we live in the United States. We can have a cell phone, but we ain't the real person who is the company that owns them cell phone and sells cell phones. And there's no reason why we can't have a cell phone. There's no reason why Congo can't export coltan or whatever else it needs, but it just needs to be done under the direction and determination of the people of the Congo. That's all. And then they can even be self-mining, safe mining conditions and whatnot. Now there's no safety. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, I completely get it, what you're saying. And we had a question that came in from someone in the chat, a guest that's listening in, and Krista, she says, the how is, well, it's more of a comment, but I'd love for you to expand on this. The how is a question because it's near impossible to depose existing leadership without guns and violence. It's always been easier for leadership to suppress small opposition groups than for small opposition groups to depose the leadership. And that is really speaking to me as the question of how do we do this?
Well, I mean, we got to be honest. That's a true. What that person puts is true. So then the question becomes, why are we trying to do it without guns? I mean, guns and violence are being used against us. That's why we can't do it with just three. And so, and I'm not, people would say we're advocating that that's an avocation of violence. It's not. I mean, if in fact we need, because people will say, oh, in the United States, I have the right to have a gun and protect my house and nobody coming in, and no one's going to question that, right? Not no one, but a lot of people don't question it here in the United States. But then when it comes to us organizing ourselves and protecting our whole national, interests, then we got to do everything, So right now, it's not, the question is power. I think that the person's raising, and it's a legitimate question because we can't gun, the forces and whatnot, but we do have to be able to, because the ranks of the people, and that's why the political education and whatnot is important. The ranks of those in these formations, these groups, violent groups, and there was a word you used when you described it. I like that word, but I can't remember what you used. The groups that are wrong, they're going around enforcing their interest through violence, armed groups, or I don't remember what you used, but anyway, we're really talking about generations of people who are misguided, right? And they're actually in harm's way themselves, having to live like that. This is how we do it with us. So we have to also find ways to show them a better world, and to opt for something else. In a way, it's what I don't know how I would call it, demoralizing the enemy is the best way I can to think of, because people don't want to live like that. When we do gang work in our communities here, we always find out the young people, I don't want to live like that. I don't see any other choice. And that's how this is the same thing with our people there. So well, the short answer is, one, we shouldn't shy away from having to arm ourselves. Them that I identify as African. I'm not there, but they shouldn't feel guilty or wrong if they have to do that. But it's a question of protection, not a question of offense and doing things. We don't want to more violence. And the question is not that there are guns. The question is, who has the guns? What is their political and ideological orientation? Are they assaulting and trying to, covet resources and massacre people, or are they just trying to protect the civilian people, protecting a society and a system that they have that's benefiting?
Well, I thank you for that commentary. I think it's really important, and I think Krista for writing in. If there's any other questions from the audience, please do put them in the chat. I want to, in our last 9 or 10 minutes or so, also just comment on, have you comment and give your sort of top 3 recommendations of what to do, what we should do, what the international community should do, if you will, what Africans should do to support the people of the Congo.
Mm-hmm. And there's something I would say that also leads to the question we just asked, and this is also the interconnectedness of the issues of the Congo. A lot has been done to malign the forces. I can't remember the countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger right now. That because they say, oh, it's a coup, these are coup governments, right? But these governments are popular right now with the people, and a lot of them seem to be instituting things that are and then making alliances with each other that are benefiting the masses of the people, particularly Burkina Faso. Some interesting things there. So we really have to look back. That's what I meant when we said we have to, before these countries, we didn't know where, a foot in the door or something, some light at the end of the neo-colonial tunnel would be. But, and I know that's controversial. People say, well, it's just undemocratic. Well, no, we don't want to be there. We don't want to have to, but if the democratic process, because in a lot of these other countries, you're having quote unquote democracy where they're electing officials, but the will of the people is not being followed and people are kind of mechanically doing it. So what I'm suggesting is that also when countries can situate themselves to have some degree of self-determination and cooperation with other countries, then it opens the door for things like what could happen, potentials in the Congo and whatnot. And so we also have to support, outside of that, we have to look critically at what's happening and not fall prey to the narrative and the judgments about certain countries and certain things that the West, just because it's against their interests, they're going to malign and say, oh, that's undemocratic. And, the countries they're calling democratic and putting sanctions on Niger and whatnot, they're unpopular. These are unpopular governments.
Well,
but
let me just, I want to step in because I think that's a great point, but also Travis Young in the audience has a question. He says, how does support not become paternalizing of the African people across the global South?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. That's an excellent question. I think we do have to figure out, like those of us who are outside, we have to make our connections. And it goes back to what we were saying with the people on the ground who are organizing and who have a vision for their at least local vision. We have to make connections with them and be humble in what we can learn from the people. It's very important for us to do that because we don't, I think and then we want to defer to them in terms of what kind of policy recommendations, if we're going to push a policy in the policymakers here, pending in the absence of having any real, people who are not so just so committed to neoliberalism. But in the meantime, we should be pushing policy. We should demand it, expose people who don't want to support policies that on the ground, but our policies that we come up with should be informed by the people on the ground there. That's how we do it without being paternalistic. We defer to them basically. Mm-hmm. And then we also politically educate ourselves. We need to do we can do it, and some of us we do this international political education sessions with each other, so we're actually involving ourselves and collective political education, so we can talk about what we can offer what we know from our purview, they offer what they know from their purview, and the synthesis of that becomes results in us having a better understanding of how to change the world.
I think that's really important, and I think diasporans have to play a key role, whether in the Congolese diasporans here, mm-hmm. in translating and demystifying the cultural differences, and also can be very helpful in affecting change on the ground through organizing folks here to connect to people on the continent, across the continent. I'm a Liberian-born diasporan, and so I do believe in the power of diaspora to be very helpful in those roles as well. I know we only have a few minutes. I want to get to your next two recommendations on the things that we can do, the international community, not the paternalizing international community, but things that we can do to support civil society, to raise awareness about the conflict. I believe the Norwegian lead and humanitarian organization said that this is the most ignored conflict ongoing on the ground in the world today. How do we raise awareness? How do we support the people on the ground that are suffering from this conflict? What are your recommendations?
This is the first thing I think of is deferring to our friends and friends of the Congo. They do something and it's not just them. It's something called Congo Week, and that's just one thing that we could do. Congo Week, which I think is in October, I think, mm-hmm. and that throughout is raising awareness, teach-ins, demonstrations, whatever. A lot of it is teachings, mostly in forums, and that they can actually, we should tap in with Friends of the Congo. We should also look up congoweek.org as a website, I believe, okay. And that we can, actually be even virtually invite people virtually from the Congo and we should fill a auditorium. We can do it now. The pandemic has taught us a whole lot of stuff about virtual conferencing, and then have on the screen somebody from the Congo. We should be doing study circles that read Ghost of King Leopold's Ghost and Challenge of the Congo, and also current things about the news, what's happening in the Congo, and have discussions about it. And so those are things about raising awareness. And then also whenever there is any type of legislation or anything that affects the Congo. And we should also do research on these corporations that are benefiting. And I think some high profile direct actions that target these corporations and you know, like in terms of demonstrations and banners drops or whatever the case may be, that will raise the profile and then about the situation in the Congo is what's needed. And then that way we can actually, you know, influence the discourse that happens around it. The people that in power can't just ignore it or say things that are not really in the best interest.
Yes, absolutely. So, okay, I got a couple of things that came out of that. We're going to, everyone go over to friendsofthecongo.org and see what they're doing, join them, look at their advocacy efforts and support that. And everyone, I swear, if you're interested in this conflict, it is a must read. King Leopold's Ghost. Absolutely brilliant book, and sad, but it, like I said, it reads like a novel and it gives you the history of it, fact-based, and it's incredible. So thank you so much for your time, Netfa. Thank you for this interesting and compelling conversation. Where can people find you if they want to continue to talk to you about these issues or learn from you?
Me personally, I'm on Facebook. I'm probably the only Netfa Freeman on Facebook, NETFA, and then on Twitter too, Netfa Free, NETFA. I say it like that because people inverse those two middle letters a lot for some reason. So NET, then FA, Free on Twitter. And you know, I'm in Pan African Community Action and Black Alliance for Peace. My email address is netfa@blackallianceforpeace.com.
All right, and people can find me. I am at Aljean_1913 on Instagram. I also host the Minority Leaders podcast, which we hope you listen to, about women of color doing amazing things in policy, and policy making. You can follow us at the Minority Leaders on Instagram, and you can listen to the episodes here soon. Our next episode will have a Palestinian American talking about her work in on these issues at the Middle East Policy Council. And so, yeah, I hope to hear from you and keep this conversation going.
Thank you. Thank you, Aljean. Thank you, Netfa, for such an informative and insightful conversation. We're breaking for lunch now, everyone. I hope you take some time to eat, to hydrate, to process, and engage with the Black Policy Lab community. If you have any questions during the break, a member of our BPL team will be available online, so don't hesitate to get those questions to us. And we will see everyone at 2:45 for our session, Mad City, Urban Planning, Redlining, Gentrification, and Food Apartheid. It's been a wonderful morning, everybody. Thank you so much, and we will see you at 2:45.
Thank you.
Thank you.